Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett, and today I'm going to read to you Chapter 9b from Seven Sisters, The Voyage. President Bramwell felt the need to make his way around to all the wards that morning, to take a few minutes in each of their prayer meetings and give them encouragement and make the suggestion that they try very hard to be happy under any or all disagreeable circumstances. After the meetings, some of the saints ventured up on deck, where they were surprised at the density and chill of the fog engulfing the ship. Those who hadn't bundled up enough went back down to put on more clothing, or they ultimately became discouraged and just stayed below. There weren't the usual number of saints topside this bone-chilling day, but those who were there moved to their favorite places to sit and occupy themselves for the morning. Stepping out of the hatchway door, Phoebe exclaimed, "I can hardly see across the deck. This fog is as thick as the pea soup I ate last night." "Do you think we can find our way to Grammy's chairs?" asked Fanny. Phoebe started to feel her way along the bulwark. "Hold my hand, Fanny." They moved slowly, because they would often meet another person who startled them as they stepped through the fog, 10 feet away. "Oops, sorry," they said in unison as they let each person pass. Finally, they arrived at their coiled rope chairs and sat down. The ropes were damp from the fog, but the twins didn't mind. They played a game to see who would step through the fog towards them. Phoebe counted 12 males and Fanny counted 8 females. It was fun for a little while until Phoebe suddenly announced, "I'm tired of this game, and I'm tired of this ship." Fanny agreed. "Seems like we've been away from our home forever. Do you think we'll ever set foot on dry land again?" "I'm beginning to wonder." Fanny's voice cracked. "I miss Papa and the boys." "I miss Mummy and Edward too," said Phoebe, trying to hold back her tears. "I just want us all to be together in one place, not in 3 different places." Fanny dug into her pocket and brought out a sea biscuit, which she took in both hands and cracked in half, using the leverage of her knee. She gave half to Fanny. "Ooh, I've got jumpers in mine," said Fanny, flipping a couple of little insects off so she could take a bite. Phoebe examined her half, and finding nothing there, began to gnaw on it. Then she grew nostalgic. "I'd give anything for bread like Mummy makes." Just then their conversation was interrupted by a loud roaring, which lasted almost 10 seconds. Both girls screamed and grabbed onto each other. "What in heaven's name was that?" said Fanny, with horror written on her face. Phoebe was panic-stricken. "I don't know, but it sounded like 2 monsters trying to beat each other to pieces." The sound hadn't stopped very long before the twins were startled with another loud roar, which caused them to scream again and try to get out of their ropes to go below and find Susanna. "What are you 2 screaming about?" said Huntley, stepping out of the fog, looking for victims of the monumental catastrophe. "That loud roaring noise," Fanny exclaimed. "Didn't you hear it?" "Are there monsters in the fog?" asked Phoebe, wide-eyed. Dismissing the twins' fears, Huntley reassured them. "Those? Oh, they're just growlers." "Growlers?" questioned Fanny. "Sometimes a big chunk of ice breaks off an iceberg and floats into another big chunk of ice. When they hit, they bang and bump and make growling sounds." Straining to see through the fog, Phoebe exclaimed, "Sounds like they're awfully close." "Oh, I don't think so," said Huntley. "Captain Hudson dreads the banks of Newfoundland. He always takes a wide berth around icebergs. He only wants to see them from a distance." "Well, I don't want to hear any more of them," Fanny announced. "I'm going below." "Want some hardtack, Mr. Huntley?" Said Phoebe, holding out what was left in her. Let me start over on that. "Want some hardtack, Mr. Huntley?" And said Phoebe, holding out what was left of her biscuit. "I can't eat sea biscuits with only 6 teeth on top," he cackled, showing his uneven remaining pickets. The girls giggled. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Huntley." They held hands as they felt their way along. "See you in reading class," he said, chuckling. The fog continued through the afternoon and night. The saints were starting to get used to the bell sounding every half minute. Most of them could sleep right through it now. The next day, the fog was as thick as ever, and the ship was still moving by inches. The saints began to really enjoy their prayer meetings now, which had been extended an hour to help them pass the time. After the priesthood leaders delivered their sermons, they would call on certain heads of families to take up the remaining time, bearing their testimonies. They also added hymns by small groups as well as violin and vocal solos to the meetings. Lavinia was honored to be asked to sing Brother Fowler's new hymn, "We Thank Thee, O God, for a Prophet," while George accompanied her on his violin. Everyone loved to hear Lavinia sing. Her singing transported them to their own world of thoughts and memories. The captain ordered a double watch until the fog lifted, and these extra sailors were stationed around the bulwark, peering into the fog to make sure another ship wasn't nearby. The crew had had a scare the night before when they heard a bell tinkling in the distance. This perked them up immediately, and they watched and listened intently to see if the bells were getting louder or growing more faint, which would indicate that the unseen ship was moving away from the Amazon. In this case, they were gratified when the ringings grew softer and eventually stopped altogether. The next day went without incident for the crew, who were getting very tired of the fog that surrounded them. They wanted to get on with the business of sailing the Amazon, all the sails unfurled and pulling strongly. There would be extra pay for the Black Ball line when the crew completed their voyage, and the sooner they got to New York, the sooner they could enjoy the companionship of money, ale, and women. That evening, when all the saints were below taking care of their families and getting them fed and ready for their evening prayer meetings, Eleanor knew she had a few minutes to take care of 2 buckets of water the sisters had used to wash down their berths. Everyone had been ordered to take whatever they had stored on top of their berths and put it on the floor. This included luggage, clothes, cooking utensils, bedding, and mattresses. Then they were instructed to scrub their berths down thoroughly. Everyone was astonished at how dirty the wood was beneath their mattresses. The water in the buckets was mud puddle brown. As Eleanor climbed the steep hatchway stairs, the buckets grew heavier and heavier. When she stepped through the hatchway into the deck, she gasped. The fog was like dense white wool. She couldn't even see the bulwark where she was planning to dump the water. She took 4 steps forward and stopped, and then staring ahead to see if she was going to run into anything, she took 4 more steps, paused, and then stepped sideways so she wouldn't run into a crate. She repeated this pattern until she could see the bulwark, quite relieved to reach her destination. By now her shoulders ached as though she had been strapped to a torture rack. She put the buckets down, rubbed her shoulders, and flexed her fingers. She took a moment to look over the bulwark. She was amazed that she couldn't even see the ocean from the deck. She hoped the water she was dumping wouldn't miss its mark. She smiled at her wit as she emptied the first bucket. Sure enough, the ocean was there. The splashing sound verified her theory. As she put that bucket down and picked up the other one, she smelled the sweet aroma of pipe tobacco. She turned to see where it was coming from. She studied the cloud of fog all around her. It was eerie on deck this time of night. Every creak and groan of the ship startled her. Her heart began to race. She wondered where all the sailors were. It was unusually quiet from the commands that were generally shouted back and forth by the crew. Then she realized it was supper time for them too. Just then the bell clanged loudly. Her heart jumped and her pulse surged. "Oh!" she exclaimed and clutched her throat. The bell was twice as loud on deck as it was below. There was at least one sailor on duty, she thought. Then she realized that she needed to get on with the task at hand so she could rejoin her sisters below before she was startled by the next bell. She picked up the full bucket and heaved it to the bulwark. Bracing it, she hurriedly poured out the dirty brown water into the invisible ocean below. Turning around, she took a sudden intake of breath and stepped backwards, only to run into the bulwark behind her. There stood Titus within 2 feet of her, his huge frame hovering over hers. She quickly composed herself and summoned up all her power. She was not going to mince words, and with as much authority in her voice as she could muster, she looked Titus directly in the eye and emphasized each word as she ordered, "Get out of my way." Unflinching, Titus smiled and replied in smooth tones, "I just came to assist you, Sister Wise." Eleanor shot back with force, "I do not need your assistance, Mr. Holt. Now step aside and let me pass." Titus's face hardened and he clenched his teeth. "I don't think so," he said, and took a step forward. Eleanor, still clutching the handle of her bucket, brought it around with all her strength and tried to hit Titus on the head, but Titus saw it coming and ducked, only to be hit on the shoulder. He grabbed the bucket away from her as she struggled to keep it and flung it across the deck. He pushed his body against hers, trapping her against the bulwark. Then he tried to kiss her. Eleanor struggled mightily. She expended everything she had to fight him off, but his strength was incredible. His lips were wet and his breath smelled of tobacco as he covered her face with kisses. He grabbed the front of her bodice where it buttoned up and with very little effort tore it open to reveal her camisole. "You've been trying to beguile me from the beginning," he snarled as he groped her breast. "You boorish brute, let go of me." "I'll have you first as last," he said as he kissed her neck and white shoulder. Eleanor was desperate. "Please, God, please help me," she prayed aloud. Then out of the corner of her eye, she saw several belaying pins standing in a row on the bulwark to her right. She reached and was barely able to grasp the pin closest to her. She nudged it loose. Then with all her strength, she pulled it straight up, and with one continuous motion, she cracked Titus soundly on the head. He immediately loosened his grip, and his hands went to his head to shield it from more of the vicious hits. But he wasn't fast enough to escape a second blow, which landed with such force that he fell to his knees on the deck. Eleanor was free from his crushing prison. She gathered her bodice together and ran as rapidly as she dared through the fog in the direction of the hatchway. Her flight was cut short when she ran into a barrel and stumbled to the deck. Getting up, she swept in front of her with both hands to feel her way past the other obstacles in her way. She couldn't see the hatchway. Where was it? Had she run too far? She backtracked a few steps. Then, peering into the fog with all her focusing power, she looked left, and then she swept her eyes right. She finally saw the faint light that came up from the hatchway. "There it is. Thank you, Heavenly Father," she whispered gratefully. It was only a little ways away. She could make it. She proceeded again, but before she had taken 2 steps, Titus came flying out of the bank of fog and tackled Eleanor around the legs. She screamed in sheer terror as she flopped down on the deck with a loud thud. "Help me, please, someone," she shouted as she thrashed her around, trying to get away. Just then, President Tippett stepped through the hatchway entrance and saw 2 bodies struggling at his feet. He had no idea who lay before him, but had come upstairs quickly when he heard the voice of a female in distress. "Let go of her, you rogue," he commanded as he pulled the sailor up and delivered a hard fist to his jaw. Tippett could now see that he was dealing with Titus, who he had sent backwards into a barrel. Titus was caught off balance and fell over. Before the man of superior strength could get into position to return blows, President Tippett took the offensive and moved towards him, laying another ringer on Titus's chin. This sent him like an anvil to the deck. Just then, President Sloan and Palmer came out of the hatchway, with Matthew tagging them. They rushed to grab either side of Titus and stand him up. "Matthew, run and get Captain Hudson," Tippett ordered. "What has taken place here?" questioned President Bramwell as he stepped out of the hatchway. "Sister Wise was attacked by Titus," said Elder Tippett, holding his right hand in pain. Within seconds, the captain arrived on the scene, only to be confronted by President Bramwell, who was livid. Not sparing any words, Bramwell spoke in strong tones. "Captain, this sailor tried to force himself on Sister Wise. He attacked her and tore her bodice." Captain Hudson knew this was an explosive situation. He looked into the resentful eyes of Titus and declared, "This kind of conduct will not be tolerated." "I am warning you right now, Captain," said Bramwell. "We will not wait for you to discipline this sailor like you did the last one. We want a judgment and a sentence right here and now on the spot." Captain Hudson tried to placate Bramwell. "He will be punished appropriately." Bramwell didn't calm down one whit. "The punishment must be swift and fierce, and if you don't stand against these animalistic actions of your crew, there are enough experienced sailors among the saints on this voyage to manipulate this ship and bring it safely to the New York harbor." The captain knew Bramwell was dead serious. "I can see this was a deliberate attack, and it was meant to inflict the most horrible of degradations on Miss Wise." Then turning to Titus, he announced, "Titus Holt, because of your actions, you are under ship's arrest and will be flogged 15 stripes tomorrow at daybreak." Titus growled, "That's harsh punishment, Cap. I swear to you she was bringing on my attentions. You'd better reconsider." The The captain knew what he must do. He ordered 2 crewmen, newly arrived on the scene, to take Titus below to be put in irons. Turning his attention away from the captain, President Bramwell took President Tippets aside. Take Sister Wise down to her sisters and have them pay a good deal of attention to her. Then turning back to Captain Hudson, he said firmly, this had better be the last incident we have on this voyage. With conviction in his voice, the captain replied, I assure you it will be. The captain then moved down the hatchway to supervise the lockup. President Tippets took off his coat jacket and put it around the shoulders of Eleanor, who had her head down and was clutching her bodice together. He led her to the hatchway with his arm around her to support her weak and trembling body. Starting down the stairs, her knees buckled, but Tippets had a good grip on her shoulders and raised her back up. She was physically drained from her battle with Titus. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, she hesitated and looked back up the hatchway. Then the dam broke as she let every emotion pour out. She sobbed violently while President Tippets tried to comfort her. You'll be all right, Sister Wise. It was a close call, but you'll be all right. The sisters greeted President Tippets and Eleanor as they came through the doorway, but when they saw that Eleanor was hurt, they grew alarmed and rushed to her. They were full of questions, but Tippets derailed them. You'll know what happened later, sisters. For right now, please, just help Sister Wise into her berth. She needs rest. The sisters worked over Eleanor with tears in their eyes as they prepared her for bed. They could hardly get her fingers to let go of her bodice. Her hair had come loose from its usual neat upsweep and now partially covered her face and eyes. She was sobbing lightly with her head down. She seemed to stare and didn't respond to any of them as they fawned over her with cooing reassurance that she was safe now and that they would take care of her. As they removed her dress, they noticed large red marks up and down her arms and neck, which were already starting to bruise. What could have happened? They worked hastily to get her into her nightdress and tucked into her berth. She curled up immediately, bringing her knees up to her chin. She closed her eyes and didn't respond to their good nights as tears squeezed out under her eyelashes, and she clutched her covers to her chest, where she had once held her bodice together. The sisters were frantic with worry as they sought out President Tippets. Sisters, be at ease, he said. Sister Wise will be all right with some rest and tender care, but she has been through a traumatic and physical confrontation with a member of the crew. Susanna interrupted. Let me guess. Titus Holt? Yes, it was, but he is in irons now and will be punished with 15 stripes tomorrow morning. That's too good for that filthy swine, Caroline said with contempt. Did he, stammered a tearful Lavinia, not daring to ask the full question. He was apprehended before he could do any real harm to her, but there was a fierce battle, and she fought for her life. The sisters were relieved that Titus wasn't able to carry out his dishonorable plan. Let's get back to Eleanor, sisters, said Susanna. She has taken care of us this entire voyage, and now it's our turn to take care of her. The sisters still had questions, but realized they needed to tend to their friend now and nurse her back to health. When they got back to the berth, Phoebe and Fanny were sitting on the edge of Eleanor's berth, guarding her as she slept. She's finally asleep, reported Phoebe, but every few minutes she jerks suddenly and yells out. If we pat her, she jumps and slaps the air, said Fanny, as if she's fighting someone. Phoebe, Fanny, said Susanna, get to bed, please. I think Eleanor will feel better in the morning. The twins uncharacteristically obeyed their sister by climbing into their berth and straightway settled down for the night. The sisters continued to talk in low tones as they stepped away from their berths toward the doorway. Maybe the flogging tomorrow morning will bring some sympathy to the saints, said Susanna, and the crew will leave us alone for the rest of the voyage. Lavinia concurred. They have made our trip most miserable. It's hard to stay in a positive frame of mind with them badgering us all the time. Titus is the worst, said Lizzie. The rest just go along with what he says mostly. At least Alfie did. Caroline decided it was time to let Lizzie know how she felt. They should have flogged Alfie, too. Lizzie was appalled. He doesn't attack women, she said defensively. Then she softened. Alfie is gentle-like. Lavinia took Caroline's side. Alfie only got confined for 3 days to the captain's quarters, played cribbage the whole time. He learned his lesson, Lizzie said, and now he's polite as a cat. Caroline warned, you'd better stay away from him. He's a Gentile and hasn't got any faith. That's all you know, defended Lizzie. He told me he believes some of the preaching he's heard on deck. Susanna got a slight smile on her face. He is handsome for sure. He is indeed, said Lizzie wistfully. Lavinia was disgusted. Beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord shall be praised, she said as she turned on her heel and walked back to Eleanor's berth. And that's the end of chapter 9b. Over and out.